Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for our conversation on COVID-19 vaccine development. As COVID-19 has upended all of our lives, the prospect of a vaccine has been one of the most pressing concerns facing our nation. We are so lucky to be joined by two distinguished health policy and medical professionals who will help walk us through this extremely important process and where we are in the development of a potential vaccine, while also answering some of your submitted questions. We are thankful for the overwhelming response and interest in this event, and for all of you who sent in questions. We will do our best to get to as many questions as we can within the next hour. I also want to remind you that this event is being recorded and will be made available on my website. I would now like to take the time to introduce our special guests for this evening. Due to a last-minute change, we have two speakers rather than three tonight. Joining us this evening, we have Ventura County Public Health Officer, Dr. Robert Levin. Dr. Levin has been a frequent guest at our earlier COVID-19 teletown halls. Thank you so much, Dr. Levin, for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for this conversation.
It's my pleasure.
All right, and then we have Mary Kaczynski also with us here today. She is the Chief of Staff and Deputy Vice President for the Science and Regulatory Advocacy at the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, or PhRMA. Mary came to PhRMA after serving at the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, or BARDA, as Chief of Staff and Senior Policy Advisor at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Mary, boy, you are the person we also want to hear from this evening, and we're very, very grateful that you have joined us today. So let's get started with our conversation. Our four general topics that will inform our discussion tonight are the basics of vaccines, COVID vaccine trials and the approval process, the status and timeline for vaccine distribution, and finally, delivery and supply chain challenges. So let's start with the vaccine basics. Mary, can you briefly explain how a vaccine works and what different types of vaccines for COVID are being developed?
Thank you so much, Emma. Generally, vaccines work by inducing an immune response whose immune system then remembers the pathogen when exposed again. Remembering the pathogen, in this case, COVID-19, ensures the immune system can respond quickly to the threat when exposed again and prevent an individual from getting sick. Currently licensed vaccines in the United States utilize many different approaches to provide immunity to the public. Many of these technologies, developed over decades of research, are being used to investigate COVID-19 vaccines. The techniques used to develop a COVID-19 vaccine include manipulating the virus itself, utilizing another virus like the common cold to deliver elements of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and also using pieces of SARS-CoV-2 virus to induce an immune response. Investments in the biopharmaceutical industry over the last few decades to develop and produce these other types of vaccines have positioned us to leverage all of these different approaches for a potential COVID-19 as quickly, as safely as possible.
All right, and I want to follow up on that, Mary. Here in Ventura County, we are doing an antibody study with Cal Lutheran University, UCLA, UCI, the county, Oxnard Fire Department, and we are retesting people that initially had antibodies present in their blood. Many of these people have since seen reductions in the antibody levels in later tests, and also some retested positive for COVID after previously testing negative months prior. I just want to add for all our listeners before you answer this question, we are going to have another round of free antibody testing provided by the county. And if you can look in the discussion box, you can see the dates that we're going to be in various cities. And we hope that you all join in. This has been a very successful test so far, and we've been able to test a lot of Ventura County. So that was my little PSA, Mary. I'm sorry about that. But what do we know about losing antibody levels, and how could that affect vaccines?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Irvin. And I thank your entire district for such a proactive approach to staying on top of this devastating virus. Researchers are continuing to investigate COVID-19 and how it affects people, both in the short and in the long term. The biopharmaceutical industry is working closely with the US FDA and global regulatory authorities to identify clinical trial time points after vaccine administration to evaluate antibody levels. Any vaccine that's authorized or approved by the FDA will continue to be carefully monitored to determine how long individuals maintain an immune response. With limited natural history, we're really looking to value our commitment to exploring all options for our COVID-19 vaccine to make investments for long-term and stable vaccine supplies.
Okay, so I just want to ask, there is the potential that these levels drop so much that people will have to get a booster, let's say, every year.
So right now, the biopharmaceutical companies, each individual vaccine manufacturer is working with the US FDA on their clinical data packages. They're trying to evaluate now. You've probably seen in the press the phase 3 trials, the very large trials that are going on. Right now, we don't have a lot of the historical information on SARS-CoV-2. So right now, we're all in learning mode.
All right. And what distinguishes the different kinds of COVID-19 vaccines that are currently in development, and why are there so many?
It's a great question. So vaccine researchers are currently testing candidates that induce an immune response in different ways because we don't yet know which vaccine technology is going to work best for SARS-CoV-2. Increasing the number of shots on goal by investigating a broad range of candidates increases the likelihood of finding a viable vaccine candidate or multiple vaccine candidates. For example, both AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson's vaccine candidates utilize the same vaccine technology and a common cold virus host, but contain additional differences like the number of doses and the formulation to provide 2 separate shots on goals. We're really looking forward to being able to have a suite of vaccines available against COVID-19.
And, as Americans, we see this COVID-19 vaccine development process moving very quickly compared to past vaccine development. And obviously some of that has to do with how many different trials are going at once. And certainly both US and international investment probably play a huge role. But can you explain that time frame? When we saw the first cases of COVID, we were told it was going to take a year to a year and a half to develop a vaccine. And yet that is a very short time frame compared to other disease vaccine developments.
Yes, no, it's a great question, Assemblywoman. And I think that it's important to note that there are actually over 1,600 clinical trials going on globally for vaccines and therapeutics. And so it's important to note here, especially in the United States, as we unpack what's going on in vaccines, that the biopharmaceutical industry has actually invested in vaccine technology for decades, which positioned us to quickly leverage our experience, our knowledge, and our technology to identify potential COVID vaccine technologies and templates. Additionally, we're working closely with the FDA and other global regulatory authorities to conduct certain activities in parallel, like regulatory review and manufacturing. Engaging with Operation Warp Speed, the US government's public-private partnership designed to accelerate vaccine development, has allowed for further acceleration of certain vaccine candidates through clinical trials. This has mainly occurred through the funding of vaccine manufacturing prior to FDA licensure, which has reduced the risk for the biopharmaceutical companies.
Okay, and Dr. Levin, I want to bring you in early. I know we were waiting. Most of your questions are going to be at the end, but what percent of the general population will need to receive the vaccine for large-scale protection?
This varies with every disease. The more communicable the disease is, the higher the level of the percentage of the population that needs to be protected to keep it from spreading. So measles, which will spread at maybe 14 times, literally 14 times the rate of COVID, needs a higher what's called herd immunity, meaning people having immunity to the disease either by immunization or having had the disease before than COVID. So for for measles, it's thought to be more like 95% herd immunity. For COVID, smarter people than I are suggesting, and that's probably not the last time I'm going to say that tonight, are suggesting 70% herd immunity would be the right amount for COVID.
And so would that be 70% of the population getting a vaccine, or 70% having had the disease and a vaccine combined?
One plus the other. 70%, a total of 70% of the vaccinated plus those that have experienced the disease.
And as the healthcare official, I suppose that, I mean, we'll talk later about how you prioritize who gets the vaccine, but is there going to be some suggestion that even if you've had the disease that you take the vaccine, or is that out of your scope?
I've not heard anyone discuss that issue yet.
Okay. All right. So if we go now to the trial and approval, then these next few questions are going to focus on that. Our first question is, what is the general vaccine trial and approval process? And Mary, can you go over the different phases of vaccine trials?
Sure, thanks, Mr. Irwin. Let me just say at the outset, I'm going to talk in general about vaccine approval, knowing that the Vaccines and Related Biologics Products Advisory Committee of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration actually just met last week to talk a little bit about the specific situation related to COVID-19 vaccines, knowing that they are taking every step to make sure that they are expediting a safe and efficacious vaccine as soon as possible. So I'm going to talk through it in general. I'm going to put some specifics in there for COVID, but I do want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable and confident that there are a lot of resources publicly available to them, including at the US FDA's website if they want to learn more. So the first step in vaccine development is sequencing of the viral genome, which was completed in record time for COVID-19. Researchers then identify potential targets for a vaccine, which can be tested in preclinical studies, which is basically studies in a laboratory. If a vaccine candidate is shown to be efficacious and safe in a lab setting, researchers can then progress to phase 1 clinical trials to identify potential dosage and collect preliminary safety and efficacy data. Phase 2 trials enroll more subjects and are designed to continue to establish safety and efficacy of a vaccine. And right now, what I mentioned earlier, we're seeing in the news today, phase 3 trials are actually quite large, and they confirm vaccine efficacy and safety over larger populations. After a vaccine is licensed, the biopharmaceutical industry, the FDA, and the CDC continue to monitor vaccines to ensure safety and efficacy over the duration.
So we have heard about, to speed up the process, combinations of combining, let's say, phase 2 and phase 3. Is there anything that you would be able to tell us about that?
Sure. I think that one thing I will actually, I'll crib a little bit from Dr. Marian Gruber, who's the director of the Office of Vaccine Research and Review at the FDA. She actually made some statements just last week talking about vaccine development can be expedited but not be rushed. So she explained what the blended, well-designed phase 3 trials are that pull up some of the pieces of a phase 2 trial to move through the process as efficaciously as possible. And by that, I mean a trial that's going to collect the amount of data necessary to really be able to truly evaluate the considerations for the trial itself.
Okay, and phase 3, approximately how many vaccines are in phase 3 right now?
Sure. I think we're hearing that right now. I can talk about our member companies, that there are, I think, roughly 7 phase 3 vaccines that are currently putting data out in the United States. I think it's an important note to make that with the United States, the FDA is our gold standard for regulatory approval for safety and efficacy. There are vaccines globally in other countries that have actually received a status that's being used for patient populations to be vaccinated. But right now, I'm just talking about the United States.
Okay, and I think I've read that those are upwards to 30,000, 60,000 people. Am I correct about that kind of general number?
Yeah, that general number is definitely in the range. And see, Dr. Levin's nodding along. He knows that it can vary by population. I think the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, which is out of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, is also going to be a step in the pathway for review of these for purposes of actually identifying the populations for vaccination, knowing that certain cohorts, so the different patient groups, have already been identified.
Okay, and in the paper, we have heard, we've seen some of these vaccine trials halted briefly, or I guess still halted. Can you tell why this would happen and what it means for vaccine development and vaccine safety?
It's an important question. And I'll say that it's not uncommon for clinical trials to be halted and an independent assessment of data to be conducted to ensure that the trial can continue safely. This could happen for any potential product, not just for vaccines. Our industry halts these studies out of an abundance of caution when investigating new medicines to ensure the safety of all participants.
Okay, and elaborating on that, on the test trials, some of the groups that haven't really been covered in the trials, such as pregnant women, small children, and people over 85, I presume, at least from what we've been reading, they have not been part of any trials yet. How will these groups know that the vaccines are safe for them?
No, it's a great question. And as the mother of small children myself, it's something I'm tracking very closely. Our industry is working with the FDA and other regulatory authorities to identify non-studied groups from COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials. After licensure or authorization of a vaccine with known efficacious and safety profiles, the FDA and industry can then identify the need for any additional studies, if required, to ensure safety of COVID-19 vaccines for these non-studied populations.
Because I would assume if you look at people over 85, that's one of the vulnerable groups that you would want to vaccinate first. And so you certainly would want to make sure that that they are safe. And when we talk about for what a short time we've been working on vaccines, how are we going to know about vaccine safety, especially long-term safety? And what has past experience taught us about side effects showing up months or years into vaccine usage? Or do these side effects generally show up right away?
No, and it's an important question. And as we all think about vaccine confidence, it's important to remember that all vaccines undergo a rigorous research and development process to demonstrate safety and efficacy, followed by rigorous regulatory review by the US FDA. Following licensure of a vaccine, the FDA and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention both carefully monitor the manufacture and administration of vaccines to ensure their high quality and safety. Due to these monitoring efforts and the efforts of the biopharmaceutical companies to manufacture these products, the US vaccine supply is actually the safest in history.
Okay, and how can the pharmaceutical industry and government work together to ensure a safe and effective vaccine is available as soon as it's proven safe?
Our industry is leveraging decades of investments in therapeutics and vaccine technology to prepare for the manufacture and distribution of approved medicines, including partnering with competitors to ensure ample supply can be made available. Additionally, partnerships with the federal government to fund the manufacture of vaccine doses prior to licensure has decreased the risk for our companies. Operation Warp Speed, a US government public-private partnership, has enabled our companies to decrease this risk and has prepared a cross-functional US government nationwide distribution system with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the Department of Defense to begin shipping vaccines within 24 hours of FDA approval. I'm sure Dr. Levin is going to be able to share with us a little bit more about what that means in Ventura County, but I do have confidence, given my historical experience in H1N1, that there is a close partnership between the federal and state government for any effective vaccines to be made available.
All right, and this is a question from Mark, and it's actually, Dr. Levin, this was, I think, on the front page of the Ventura County Star, I believe, this morning, and it was about states, including California, joining a pact to independently review any coronavirus vaccine that's ultimately approved by the FDA. And I think that's really, I assume, to alleviate concerns of our residents. Do you know anything about the process? What are your thoughts about this independent review pact?
I think any knowledgeable body that reviews a decision, even though a very knowledgeable body already has, is a fine idea. It gives us confidence. We know local people better than we know people that are in Atlanta and Washington, D.C. This group of states is California, Washington, Oregon, and Nevada. And it's called the Western States Coalition, and they've joined together to form a scientific safety review work group. They're reviewing the FDA's decision as part of what they do. And the other thing they're doing is they're making sure that they're bringing equity, transparency, trust building to the distribution process. So to make it clear, politics is not figuring in to who's going to be offered this vaccine first. It will include experts in immunology, immunization, public health, biostatistics, epidemiology, infectious diseases, health equity, healthcare finance, and UCLA and Berkeley will also be involved. And it's going to be focused on the ethics of distribution, vaccine allocation, and prioritization of the most vulnerable populations like people with comorbidities, congregate facilities like skilled nursing facilities and residential care facilities for the elderly.
So I think I would feel better with that. I would also want to make sure that it adds very little time. And so hopefully they're working concurrently with the FDA review process. So we don't waste any time in making sure that those that need to be vaccinated get vaccinated as quickly as possible, but we'll be following what's happening with that. So let's transition to questions on the status and timeline for a vaccine and on vaccine distribution. Mary, if multiple vaccines are ultimately approved, how will a physician determine which ones are used?
I look forward to a day with multiple approvals of vaccines and therapeutics, and I'm cautiously optimistic it's on the horizon very soon, Assemblywoman. But to answer your question, I think the biopharmaceutical industry is committed to finding these vaccines and therapeutics with our multiple shots on goal, increasing the likelihood that we'll have a successful candidate as soon as feasible. The robust pipeline currently under evaluation is ultimately designed to ensure that the most effective vaccines and therapeutics are discovered, licensed, and distributed to the general public. We're committed to continuing our research long after the first approval or authorization to ensure the best outcomes for patients.
So is there a possibility that multiple vaccines would be approved, like with different mechanisms?
I think that as the Vaccine Research and Biologics Advisory Committee just last week stated, and Dr. Peter Marks, the Centers for Biologic Evaluation and Research, published in his op-ed just yesterday in USA Today, that the FDA is committed to trying to make products available as soon as possible once they cross that high safety and efficacy threshold. Back in H1N1, we had multiple different vaccines that were made available, both under the emergency use authorization and then through a full approval. I think that that is a realistic goal in the H1N1 space, and it's certainly something that we could carry through into today's coronavirus pandemic.
And so the assumption is that you would have multiple available, and then as you see which ones are most effective over a longer period, you might move over to one or another. Is that how that would work?
I'll turn to our public health focused colleague. I am not a medical practitioner, and I know that clinical outcomes and clinical protocols matter. So how a treating physician would make a decision about available therapeutics, or how a patient would think about things if they have multiple vaccines available to them. I think there are a number of other questions that might go into making that determination. But Dr. Levin, what do you think?
Well, I think that physicians will be looking at the literature, and the literature may favor one vaccine over another. Also, patients are very intelligent, and they may come to the physician saying, I want this vaccine. I want this specific vaccine. That is very, very possible in this setting. Most physicians' offices will only carry one vaccine. Maybe I could see two in this case. And so the physician would either, if they had the vaccine, apply it to that patient, or they might be able to tell them where to go to get it.
All right. And then, this is, I think, the question that everybody on the call wants to know. As of now, what does the timeline look like for mass distribution of vaccine? And we'll start with Mary before we get specifically to Ventura County.
Sure. Well, I hope my answer gives you at least a little bit of confidence, but since each vaccine candidate is different and requires specific considerations like the number of doses and time to manufacture a single dose, mass distribution and the aggregation under the Operation Warp Speed umbrella will ultimately depend on the specific candidates that show safety and efficacy in clinical trials. Our industry is committed to ensuring the highest safety standards for research, clinical testing, and manufacturing throughout the process, which is not going to be compromised for speed. So I think that Assemblywoman, when you made a comment at the beginning of the pandemic, when you were doing these town halls on a regular basis with your constituency, there was a lot of anticipation. And is 18 to 24 months from time of sequencing of the virus to vaccines in arms a realistic time frame? I know that's what folks are still aiming at. I don't think anybody's let their foot up off the gas, but right now for mass distribution of a vaccine, there are a number of other variables to consider.
So the genes were sequenced in December, right?
December to January. I think that, once folks started to get things into the lab.
Okay. Well, I know that there are a lot of weddings planned next summer because everybody canceled their wedding last year or postponed it for a year. There's now Friday, Saturday, and Sunday weddings, and we are hoping not only for a vaccine, but we're hoping that Dr. Levin is going to allow them all to get married. But we're not pushing anything. Don't worry, Dr. Levin. So Dr. Levin, how will Ventura County specifically prioritize who gets the vaccine first and how it will be distributed? I want the question is, you have already mentioned that you have the state PAC that's going to make sure that it's equitable distribution. What is the county going to do with that information, and how will you prioritize?
The prioritization is being worked on now at the federal level and also at the state level with county input. And I'm lucky enough to be on the state vaccine task force. Pfizer applies they say they're going to apply to the FDA for some kind of emergency approval at the end of November. Vaccine may be available in December or January, but in very small amounts at first. The first to get it will be licensed healthcare workers, as things are shaping up right now, of which there are 1.2 million in California. And so there probably won't even be that many doses that come out at first. And so only there'll be prioritization within the prioritization. And then with the next there will be in the healthcare workforce, and that will include janitors and cafeteria workers and administrators, of which there are 2.4 million. So that's going to absorb more doses of this vaccine if you're waiting as a member of the general public to get it. Then peace officers, etc., working on down the line through all of those that are being prioritized. And so when I say this, I have no knowledge that it's based on. I'm hoping that the capitalist drive to produce a lot of vaccine and sell it and make it available holds true. And that's why I'm saying that we may have gone through this list of prioritization, and the remaining people who are not on that list in the general public just may have vaccine available for them in May or June.
That sounds very optimistic.
It is very optimistic.
We're going to look with the optimistic as opposed to making sure that we don't get in trouble with our answer. So between you and Mary, hopefully we're looking at sooner as opposed to later, as long as it's safe. And I think that's what people need to know, because we don't want to be dealing with things like vaccine hesitancy. So let's say now Ventura County gets a very large number of vaccines, a large amount of vaccine. How would, I presume that the mode of delivery in California, at least, will be through the county and through the private sector. How would, let's say in Ventura County, how would you be able to distribute that as quickly as possible?
Well,
Once you've taken care of, frontline, but now that when we're talking about, let's say, down to, our elderly folks or people with comorbidity or just the general population.
well, let me include them in the discussion just as kind of an entree to it. And that is, the feds are contracting with large healthcare systems right now, Kaiser and other major healthcare systems, to turn vaccine over to them so that they can do the immunizing. They're also contracting and negotiating with pharmacies right now, and not necessarily just in the traditional ways that we expect pharmacies to vaccinate people, to immunize people. They're also asking pharmacies to develop relationships, and they're asking long-term care facilities, SNFs, et cetera, to develop relationships with pharmacies. It's a two-way process, so that the pharmacies will actually send people into these long-term care facilities to immunize people on site. So that's untraditional, and I think at least for most pharmacies and most long-term care facilities, and that's exciting. Public health is meeting with different groups throughout the county to facilitate their giving shots to people, and we will do immunizations in our immunization clinics, and we'll set up points of distribution, pods as well, to give immunizations to people.
And you have a little bit of the infrastructure in place if you look at how well you've done with COVID testing, right? Obviously you would have to, it's different requirements, but you've certainly been able to test a lot of people at once for COVID, and this seems like it would probably move a little bit faster.
I don't know that we'll use the same infrastructure. Some of the infrastructure may lend itself to doing this, but we do have just a lot of experience doing this with flu shots.
Yeah, I got mine from the pharmacy, and it was very handy. Just, schedule your appointment online and got it within just a few minutes. So,
Yeah.
So at least when I say infrastructure, there's plenty of people that are used to dealing with large volumes of people. And how fast do you think the county, if you have, let's say, half of the county that has to be vaccinated, what is the time period that you would be able to do it in Ventura County?
Well, if we had half the county that wanted to be immunized, we would feel blessed. We're concerned, the most liberal estimates of the amount of the county or any population that would want to receive this immunization is about 70%. And there are some estimates all the way down to 10%. And so we probably don't have the whole county to take on.
But do you have any idea how many, let's say, how long would it take to do 100,000 people?
Well, we would have, it's not like a gunshot would go off and suddenly 100,000 people would require immunization. We would be, phasing into this thing. And I think physicians' offices might have it, large clinic systems would have the immunization. And so the burden would be spread out because I think it's much more convenient for people to get it from their own physician or through their own clinic system. One of the issues here is that certainly in the beginning, and probably down the line as well, is that every dose will need to be accounted for in a way that we've not done with any immunization that we've utilized in the past.
And you're getting ready for that challenge also, the data, keeping track of the data?
We are. Every bit that we can do ourselves, we're doing, but so much of this, we're in a holding pattern pattern waiting for the federal government and the state to decide exactly how things are going to be done equitably.
Okay, and then for the next few questions, we're going to explore some of the delivery and supply chain challenges for vaccine development. Dr. Levin, this is for you. Given that some vaccines require certain storage conditions like ultra low temperatures, how will these be able to be transported for distribution, and what is the county doing to address these potential challenges?
Well, this is very, very interesting, and it's complicated. To begin with, there will be, at least for the Pfizer vaccine, it presents special challenges because it needs to be maintained at ultra low temperatures, which is basically -70. There will be a box that comes called a shipper, as things are currently conceived, that will arrive, and it will contain up to 5 trays of vaccine. It's referred to sometimes as a pizza box. There'll be 195 vials in each of these pizza boxes, and each vial will have 5 doses of vaccine. So that means each of these shippers will have 4,008, almost 5,000 doses of vaccine in them. There will be trays can be out of the box for no more than a minute, and then they will be filled with what's it called? Dry ice. And it's not just the blocks of dry ice. This has to be pelleted dry ice. 50 pounds will need to be refilled, and will need to be refilled every 5 days while you have this box and while you have these vaccines in your possession. The company would like this returned in 10 days, although they say on the side that 15 days would be okay. And so when it's received, if you get a whole box, you're going to have to figure out how to use those 5,000 doses in a short period of time. We anticipate that there's going to be a shortage of dry ice. And so one of the things that we're doing in our county is that we're dry ice machines that actually produce pelletized dry ice. And we're ordering, the public health department's ordering 3 of these machines. We're also ordering 3 ultra low freezers into different parts of the health department within our county so that we have that capacity. 975 doses as currently conceived by Pfizer will be the smallest order that they will take. So you only need 1 of those pizza boxes possibly, but they're trying to develop a 125 dose tray. And then again, every dose is going to need to be meticulously followed up on and cared for.
Wow. Okay, and that's for Pfizer.
That's for Pfizer. That's one company.
But you're in a little different position though, because you know it's coming, as opposed to when COVID hit and there was no time to prepare. Mary, will there be a cost to obtaining a vaccine when one is released, and who bears that cost if there is one?
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Maybe just to add a little bit of a punctuation mark onto Dr. Levin's very thorough description, I could just add that many of the vaccines in development don't require a specialized transportation and can utilize the network established by the government for routine immunizations, like the Vaccines for Children program, how people receive their MMR and annual flu vaccines. So I know that it's important to prepare for the high-end needs, but I also want to make sure that there's some confidence in the underpinning infrastructure that you already have in Ventura County.
Thank you.
But to your question, our companies are working with the government and insurers to make certain that when a new vaccine is licensed, they'll be available and affordable for patients. Additionally, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act, which was passed earlier this year, provides coverage under Medicare Part B and requires commercial health plans to cover the vaccine. Our industry is committed to ensuring that vaccines are priced appropriately to facilitate widespread uptake and the utilization.
Okay. Yeah, that would, we don't want to, we certainly wouldn't want to make that a hurdle. I have one more question for each of you, and appreciate again this very informative session. Mary, one concern that we see is vaccine hesitancy, as I had mentioned before. How do you think we can overcome that?
Instilling vaccine confidence is an important hallmark of public health, and an open, transparent process to developing a COVID-19 vaccine, coupled with education on safety and efficacy of an eventual vaccine, will hopefully help to ensure the public that vaccines are safe. Many biopharmaceutical companies have publicly posted their study protocols for their ongoing phase 3 clinical trials, which hopefully helps to increase the confidence in the scientific rigor and underpinning efficacy evaluated in these trials. Educational efforts on both the safety and public health benefits of vaccines will also hopefully help with vaccine uptakes and confidence. And as I mentioned at the beginning of our call, there was a very thoughtful piece published by Dr. Peter Marks in USA Today just yesterday with the title, "I'm the FDA point person on COVID-19 vaccines. We'll make sure they're safe and effective, and trust means everything." So I'm cautiously optimistic, as you stated at the outset of our call, that we're all in this together and we're working together towards a population that is able to safely access a vaccine and has confidence in its efficacy.
Thank you. And then the last question of the evening is for Dr. Levin. It has to do with Ventura County specifically. What does a potential vaccine mean for the county stay-at-home order? I mean, are we going to go so far as to say people who are vaccinated or have antibodies would have less restrictions than others?
Well, when you say, will people who are vaccinated have antibodies have less restrictions than others?
Vaccinated or have antibodies. I'm sorry, I didn't read that.
Yeah, no. How will you know them apart from others? How will we know who's had an immunization or who's had antibody studies done? Vaccine and COVID deniers can be anticipated to take advantage of this, saying that they've had the vaccine or that they already have a positive antibody test. Interestingly, Dr. Fauci said earlier today that there will be some restrictions, he predicted, until probably early 2022. So that's the beginning of the year after next. I say once those who want the vaccine have been immunized and we're at a good herd immunity, as good as we're going to get, it's going to be hard to have people, it's going to be challenging to contain certain individuals' need to bust loose. But I don't know when that will be or what form that will take. It's at times like this that we have to recognize really what a nightmare we're in now. What an amazing thing. What a life-changing event has happened to all of us.
All right. Yes, and you have had your work cut out for you. I'll tell you, I really admire the work that you've done, and so many people in Ventura County appreciate it. I know, as I mentioned at the beginning, it has not always been easy, but people are very frustrated. And yes, unfortunately, you're one of the ones that they have taken it out on, but we appreciate everything that you are doing here. So I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening for this very enlightening conversation. And I want to extend a special thank you to our two excellent guest speakers. As a reminder, this event was recorded and will be made available for replay right here on Facebook and on my website. And as I mentioned before, I'd like to say again that the county is going to be conducting blood draws as part of their COVID antibody prevalence study. And some of the testing locations include Santa Susana High School on November 9th in Simi, Moore Park at the Metrolink station on the 12th, and Adolfo Camarillo High School on November 16th. We also have testing in Santa Paula and Fillmore, and you can find out more about that by checking our website and the paper. And again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I want to remind everybody that Election Day is next Tuesday. Please don't forget to vote. and continue to stay safe, practice social distancing, and please be kind to one another. Have a great rest of the night, everybody. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.